Can you list for me all the girls that you have met and brought to Jeffrey Epstein's house that were under the age of 18?
Check the Foreman Foundation.
I've already characterized what my job was, which was to find people, adults, professional people, to do the types of jobs that I listed before. Pool person, secretary, house person, chef, pilot.
Every single move was planned. Private jets, helicopters, speedboats, a remote island surrounded by open water with no way off unless someone allowed it. What looked like the lifestyle of the ultra-wealthy was something far darker, a carefully constructed system designed to move young girls across state lines and international borders, away from oversight, away from protection, and directly into the hands of one of the most dangerous criminal networks the modern world has ever seen. Flight logs confirmed it. Survivor testimonies detailed it. Federal investigations dismantled it. This is the story of how that pipeline worked, from the very first point of contact to the island at the end of the route. Nothing about this operation started honestly. It was built on a foundation of manipulation, and it targeted the most vulnerable people imaginable. Young girls, some as young as 14, from broken homes, from struggling families, from communities where an offer of money or opportunity was impossible to refuse. The recruitment was not random either. It was strategic. Ghislaine Maxwell and other young women already embedded in the network fanned out across shopping malls, schools, and social circles in Florida, New York, and beyond. The pitch was always designed to sound legitimate. Modeling contracts, educational funding, introductions to powerful and influential people, or work as a personal masseuse for a wealthy businessman. Survivor Virginia Jeffery has stated publicly that she was just 16 years old when she was approached and offered massage work. What that work actually involved became clear very quickly. The structure functioned like a pyramid. Girls who were already involved were financially incentivized to bring others in. Court records later revealed that detailed tracking systems were maintained. Names, schedules, contact information, travel arrangements. This was not informal, this was managed. Payments of $200 to $300 per visit created financial dependency, particularly for girls with no other reliable income. For international recruits, the network went further, arranging visas under false pretenses, listing occupations as modeling or domestic work to move people across borders without raising flags. Once someone was inside the system, extraction became increasingly difficult. The financial dependency was intentional, the isolation was intentional, and what came next was the most critical component of the entire operation: movement.
The logistics of this pipeline were not improvised. They were deliberate, repeated, and refined over decades. Multiple private aircraft were used throughout the operation. The most documented was a Boeing 727 that later became publicly known as the Lolita Express. When flight logs from this aircraft were unsealed, they revealed hundreds of trips spanning from the 1990s through to 2019, a timeline of nearly 30 years. Departure points included Palm Beach, New York, Paris, and London. Passengers included some of the most powerful and well-connected names in business, politics, and entertainment. And the destination, in many cases, was St. Thomas in the United States Virgin Islands. But St. Thomas was not the final stop. From St. Thomas, the transport continued in smaller, more discreet vessels. Helicopters carried groups over open water. Speedboats cut through the Caribbean toward a private island that Jeffrey Epstein owned, Little St. James. Survivors have described the approach vividly. What may have begun as excitement at the spectacle of wealth and luxury shifted into something harder to name as the island came into view. Remote, surrounded by water, completely inaccessible to the outside world without Epstein's approval. There was no way off that island unless he allowed it. Once on Little St. James, the isolation that had been engineered throughout the entire recruitment and transport process reached its most absolute form. There was no public access to the island, no independent oversight, no one coming or going without authorization. Survivors described being moved between villas, guest houses, and private structures across the property. Some reported direct threats. Others described being warned in clear terms that speaking out would result in the destruction of their reputations, their families, and their futures. The wealth on display, the architecture, the landscaping, the boats, the aircraft, all of it served a single purpose. It reinforced power. It communicated that the people running this operation were untouchable. For years, that appeared to be true. The operation continued quietly through the late 1990s, through the 2000s, and into the following decade. A 2008 plea deal in Florida allowed Epstein to avoid federal prosecution on charges that should have carried significant prison time. He served just 13 months and was permitted to leave jail for work release 6 days a week. The deal was widely criticized as one of the most lenient agreements ever negotiated for crimes of this nature. It would not hold forever. In 2018, investigative journalism reignited public and legal scrutiny of the case. Then, on July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, stepping off a flight that had just arrived from Paris. Federal agents searched his Manhattan townhouse and his Palm Beach estate. What they found mapped the entire operation: cash, multiple passports, flight records, and physical evidence consistent with the abuse of minors. The blueprint was no longer hidden. Jeffrey Epstein never stood trial. He died in a federal detention facility in August 2019 while awaiting prosecution. His death was officially ruled a suicide, though it has remained a subject of intense public debate given the circumstances. But the evidence he left behind could not be buried with him. Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman prosecutors described as the central recruiter and enabler of the entire network, was arrested in July 2020. In 2021, she was convicted on 5 federal counts related to the trafficking and exploitation of minors. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. On the financial side, Epstein's estate reached a settlement of $105 million with the United States Virgin Islands. A victim compensation fund was established and ultimately distributed over $150 million to survivors. Several major financial institutions that had maintained business relationships with Epstein also reached large civil settlements in the years that followed. And yet, for all that has been resolved in courtrooms and settlement agreements, the broader network, the full scope of who knew, who participated, and who benefited remains only partially exposed. Many questions that survivors and the public have raised have not been fully answered in any legal proceeding to date.
Little St. James was sold in 2023. The structures built on that island still stand, but the operation that ran through them has been dismantled, its key figures either dead or imprisoned. What this case ultimately revealed was not simply the story of one man's crimes. It was the exposure of an entire architecture, a system where private wealth funded private transport, where isolation replaced accountability, and where the movement of vulnerable young girls across international borders was treated as a logistical problem to be quietly managed. The transport was not random. It was not accidental. It was structured from the ground up by people who understood exactly what they were doing and believed they would never be held responsible for it. They were wrong. And the survivors who refused to stay silent despite threats, despite disbelief, despite years of institutional failure, are the reason this story is now part of the permanent public record. Their voices built the case. Their courage dismantled the pipeline. Subscribe for more.